Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. It's the 1st of October, 2019. Yet again, I'm having one of those days where I'm like, I can't believe we're still here. Like a ton of stuff to talk about today. We had another crazy breaking news day yesterday, and even this morning. There's been continuing breaking news. One thing I want to say this morning is that literally just like 1 minute ago, we got word that the Amber Guyger, the police officer who shot Botham Jean in his own apartment, has been found guilty of murder. So that's a little bit of good news to carry us forward into to Tuesday. There was a lot of concern yesterday about the judge's ruling that the Castle Rule could be applied. I personally think that this is the right outcome. The Castle Rule being applied to a white cop who wasn't even in her own home would have been something quite extreme. So in any event, she has been found guilty of murder. That is a very good sign. I'm very pleased that that is the development. That one of the bits of breaking news this morning, having nothing to do with the president. Okay, so let's get started. We'll talk. I want to just make something really clear to you about what's happened in the last 24 hours. The veil is really being pulled back now on what the president and Barr and Pompeo have been up to, not just inside the United States, but all over the world. So late yesterday afternoon, in the span of about a half an hour, we learned that Pompeo had been on the call with the president and Zelensky when the president made the quid pro quo offer with regard to Ukraine interfering in the 2020 election. That in and of itself was quite bizarre, because he had previously indicated that he didn't really remember anything. And so Pompeo was in on the mix from that. Then we learned that similar requests to either investigate the president's past or present political rivals had been made to other countries at the suggestion and with the coordination of Bill Barr. So we now get to add the following. We now have a list that's 5 countries that the president has attempted to use their own intelligence services for his own political vendettas. That includes now Ukraine, Russia, Australia, Great Britain, and Italy. So we really had a day yesterday where the dominoes were falling fast and furious. And then thereafter, there came a letter that we found out about from Australia, from the Australian Intelligence Services, stating that they would be willing to help the president investigate the origins of the Steele dossier. That was CC'd to Mick Mulvaney, who, as you all know, is the acting chief of staff, as well as the head of the OMB. So this conspiracy and the folks wrapped up in it continues to grow at an incredible rate. And the sign that we have right now of how afraid these folks are about where they find themselves, well, first of all, they're quite numerous, okay? So we have Rudy Giuliani being subpoenaed yesterday by 3 House Intelligence Committees. He now has lawyered up. That's very, very clear. There were some tweets out of him yesterday that sounded nothing like Rudy. He has not admitted that he is lawyered up, but it's very clear from what he's writing that he has. He's invoking attorney-client privilege when just last week he said he wasn't the attorney to the president. That one's going to be a hard one to win on his part. So they're running scared. And then this morning, Pompeo wrote a letter stating that he felt that lifers at the State Department were being bullied by requests that were made to him from Congress and to the State Department from Congress concerning these allegations, and that the witnesses that had been requested for subpoena would not show up to testify. Let me just say something. The House committees have made very clear in the last 24 hours that they are no longer messing around with their inherent contempt power. So the failure of state, and particularly the pushback from Pompeo claiming that he's being bullied, and the refusal to produce witnesses to testify, is not going to fly. It's not going to fly with these committees. And particularly, my bet is it's not going to fly with Adam Schiff's committee. So, you know, we knew there was going to be pushback, but let me just say this. They've got to drop the hammer on inherent contempt with this, but quick. Because fundamentally, there's no reason for any of these people to not be able to show up tomorrow to testify. You know, and there's a few pundits running around today saying like, oh, Pompeo's just saying his staff needs more time to find lawyers. That's bullshit. You can find a lawyer to represent you at a congressional hearing like in half an hour in Washington, D.C. So I personally think that we've got some really serious signs here of cracks in the facade. We have to add to that Chuck Grassley issued a statement this morning saying that the whistleblower's safety and identity needs to be protected, that anyone suggesting that the whistleblower needs to be dragged into the public spotlight is breaking the law. And that's Chuck Grassley as one of the senior most Republican senators, first of all, calling the president a liar, and second of all, saying that the whistleblower needs to be protected. One of the other things Grassley said is that you do not need firsthand knowledge. We talked about this yesterday on the broadcast. You do not need firsthand knowledge to file a whistleblower complaint. And, again, this is one of those situations where we are starting to see Republicans push back against this president. We talked yesterday about McConnell stating that he would have to bring impeachment to the floor of the Senate if impeachment leaves the House. Now we've seen Grassley pushing back on this. Again, we're starting to see calls. There have been a number of op-eds in the last 24 hours for Republicans to stand up against this president. This morning, by the way, the first major newspaper in the United States called for the president's impeachment. That was the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. This morning said it was time to dump the president. It was a very moderated op-ed from their editorial board. It was not one that was like over the top. It was just like, we're done. Like, it's time to get rid of him. Admitted that there were arguments to be made on both sides of the fence, not many of which I happen to agree with, but, it was a very moderated, article from the Midwest calling for the president to be removed from office. So that was a very big development. All right. We've had multiple instances in the last 24 hours of the president not only threatening the whistleblower, which I will remind you all is obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, abuse of power. We've had calls for the whistleblower's name to be outed, which, again, I want to remind you all, the whistleblower laws protect the identity of whistleblowers for exactly the reason that otherwise whistleblowers won't come forward. And many of you, this was the most prominently asked question on the question feed this morning, are concerned about the whistleblower's safety. So let's just recap what happened on Sunday night, because we didn't talk about it yesterday. There was a very big breaking piece on 60 Minutes about this entire situation with the whistleblower. There was apparently a misinterpretation by one of the reporters on the 60 Minutes beat that the whistleblower was under federal protection thanks to the president's threats. It turns out the whistleblower is not under federal protection, but nonetheless, the whistleblower's lawyers have written to those in charge of the chain of distribution of the whistleblower complaint, stating that they appreciated all the help that could be given to protect the whistleblower's safety. I said last week, I'm going to say it again. I have literally no doubt in my mind, none right now, that the whistleblower has safety of some kind. It may be privately retained security that's been hired by the whistleblower's lawyers. It may be security that's being provided by the feds. But one way or another, it's not like the whistleblower is just out wandering the streets randomly waiting to be attacked and assaulted if his or her identity becomes publicly known. I literally have no question about this. And as someone who's been involved in, having to secure security, not just for myself, because I have, unfortunately, but also as someone who's been involved in a very high profile legal matters where issues of security were dominant, no lawyer in their right mind, let alone lawyers this accomplished, because, this is the other thing to know. The whistleblower's lawyers specialize in whistleblower complaints. Like, that's what these guys do. They're not going to let this person be wandering around out there without any security. So I honestly think, while we absolutely must pay attention to the president's threats, which are against the law, and once again, impeachable offenses, none of us should be walking around paranoid that the whistleblower is going to get taken out. I do not think that that's likely at this point. I mean, never, you can't ever predict what one crazy person might decide to do. But all that said, this is a person who, at this moment in time, literally, again, I have no question, has personal security. So again, we have bigger things to focus on than that right now. I mean, honestly, whistleblower and the whistleblower's attorneys are doing what they need to do. That GoFundMe for the whistleblower, by the way, which I circulated late last week, the last time I looked was at $150,000. They now have a legal defense fund that can afford security. So, we can put that to the side, I think, at the moment, in the context of things that we can worry about. All right. The other thing that I just want to mention here is that this talking point, though, however, of the president deserves to confront his accusers, is one that the Republicans who are defending him, like Lindsey Graham, have taken up. So let me just make one other point about this. You only get to confront your accusers when you're on trial for a crime. You don't get to confront your accusers randomly on social media or out there in the world if you're not sitting in a court of law. And the whistleblower laws explicitly say, I'm going to say it again, I said it once already this broadcast, explicitly require, in fact, that the whistleblower's identity be maintained as secret. That's the point of the whistleblower law. So, at this point, we need to kind of understand what the president is doing, understand that he's breaking the law in real time. He did it again this morning, by the way, for threatening to arrest Adam Schiff. One thing I just want to mention here is that it's abuse of power. Like it's another impeachable offense to threaten to arrest your political rivals or the chair of an intelligence committee that's investigating you. So literally the president is breaking the law in real time right now. And he's committing more and more impeachable offenses over and over and over again while we watch. One of the things I just want to mention here is that we are watching him decompensate in real time. We have been for quite some time. It is absolutely at an accelerated pace right now. But I want to say one other thing about this. However scary it is to have the leader of the free world losing their marbles, live on Twitter. Again, I'm sorry for being pejorative about it, but we have to talk about this for what it is. His mental state is in rapid decline. He's also showing all of the states of pushback that we would expect from somebody with NPD when they are under threat. One of the things that I just want to mention about this is that the more that he decompensates, the faster this whole thing is likely to be over. So one of the things that's disturbing about where we find ourselves is that it is happening, and it is frightening, and it is destabilizing for all of us, and it's destabilizing on the national stage. But the other thing we all have to remember here is that, the more that he does this, the more likely it is that the rats are going to flee the sinking ship. So I meant this 75% seriously. But the other thing that's starting to happen is that, we saw Bernie Sanders yesterday say that he would defeat President Pence if that's what we ended up with. That in and of itself is going to get under the president's skin. And the more that he lashes out, and the more that he breaks the law, and the more that he's unreliable, the more isolated he becomes, the more likely it is that we're going to see Republicans get on board for impeachment. So one of the keys here is that we have to be able to ride out the stress of this, you all know I've been saying this for nearly 3 years now, but we have to be able to ride out the stress of this in ways that allow it to take its course so that we can get to the ending that we want. And that doesn't mean, by the way, that I'm discounting how terrifying it is, or that there's danger and real threat, because there is. But on the other hand, the thing that we don't want is the president suddenly acting like he's stable, or taking the advice of his advisors to shut his mouth. Because absent that, the Republicans are going to be able to spin this in the ways that some of them are already trying to spin it. Some of them are not. Again, I want to really acknowledge that we are seeing quite a number of cracks in the facade in the last 72 hours out of the GOP. So again, one thing to remember here is that we have to deal with the craziness of the president, and then we have to also deal with the reality of where we find ourselves. And that's one of the reasons why I want to just emphasize the whistleblower has security. There's literally no doubt about it in my mind. So we don't need to be panicked over here about that. What we should be panicked about is that we have a president who's violating the law nonstop right now and is uncontrollable. Again, it's where we are, and we have to find ways of coping with the roller coaster that we're on until we reach the end. All right. One quick note, there has been troubling developments in this Manhattan District Attorney case to try to get the president's taxes. We learned yesterday that the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney's Office is in some way going to intervene in this. And there was a pleading filed under seal today with regard to that. The concern that many lawyers have about this, including people who are alums of the DOJ, is that this could be Bill Barr's DOJ, again, operating in the personal interests of the president, which is not what is supposed to happen. We don't know many more developments about that yet. Again, I'm going to remind you all, there is a judge overseeing that case. It's not like the SDNY gets to swoop in and do something awful if that's what's actually happening, which we have no confirmation of yet. So, again, the multitude of questions about that on the question feed. We do not have confirmation yet that the SDNY is doing anything improper here, okay? We do have indications that the SDNY is swooping in somehow, and that may just be to file a brief saying, we're in the same debate over getting the president's taxes from other sources. We don't know, okay? If, in fact, what it is, though, is the SDNY being politicized by the president, by Bill Barr, to operate to protect the president's tax returns from being disclosed, that is a profoundly troubling ethical scenario. And it does indicate, as we've already seen from other signs, that the DOJ is operating under Bill Barr at the whim of the president. This, by the way, is the Attorney General also running all around the planet asking for help in pursuing conspiracy theories about the 2016 election. I just want to put a little bit of a pause on that, though, because we do not know the reality of why the SDNY is seeking to intervene. And also, there's still an impartial judge sitting at the top of the chain of command on that case, as in every case. who will rule on whether or not the SDNY is even allowed to file briefs in that case. So let's just put a pause on that and wait and see what happens there. Again, this is one of those situations where there's a lot to worry about at the moment. And we also don't want to be spinning off into theories of worry about things that are not yet complete timeline stories about what's really going on. All right. We had a bunch of questions about resignation versus immunity. And I want to clarify something because someone on the question feed absolutely misrepresented something that I said. I know it was an accident. I'm not going to blame, but I want to make something very clear. It is not a condition of resignation of this president that he be granted immunity. And, you know, one of the things I want to remind you all about Nixon is that Nixon resigned without a promise of immunity. He was pardoned later by Gerald Ford, like 6 months after he resigned. But he didn't resign with a guarantee. Or actually, it was a month later. I think it was like 35 days or something like that. But he didn't resign with a guarantee. And I have never suggested, I just want to make this really clear, that any resignation would have to be conditioned on his immunity. In fact, what I said earlier this week, yesterday, what I said late last week was that while there could be a negotiated immunity, I said this yesterday, from the federal standpoint, they're going to have a really hard time getting the president immunity from the Attorney General of New York State, the Manhattan District Attorney, any state or local law enforcement organizations, tax organizations, you know, that are currently investigating the president. He's under investigation for a million things right now. You know, that's pejorative, but, you know, like literally there's hundreds of investigations underway. There's no way he's going to be granted immunity on all of them in exchange for a resignation. It's not possible. Like it's literally not possible that could happen. So, you know, for those of you who are freaked out about that, you know, I just want to say, like, again, let's deal with the facts. But the other thing that I want to say about this that feels very important to say right now is also this. The thing that is the most important right now for the sanctity of American democracy, for the safety of human beings, for a change in immigration policy at the border, for the rectification of the situation of having the Attorney General in office, for the situation right now with Stephen Miller being a senior advisor to the president in all of his fascist glory. The way that gets rectified is that the president is removed from power. Because the entire administration turns over when there's a new president. And, you know, while I don't have I'd like not even any hope. I'm like quite disgusted by the idea of a President Pence. Usually when there's a new president in office, the whole cabinet flips, as do all senior advisory staff. Now, that might not be the case here if the president is impeached, but let me just say this. The second he is removed from power, the threat of harm to people in this country will diminish dramatically on every level. And so, you know, part of what we have to consider here is what's the bargain we're willing to strike. And I personally will tell you that I sit in a place right now where, because I know the president cannot be pardoned for everything, because I know that there can't be any immunity deal struck on every single crime that he's ever committed that's currently within a statute of limitations, I'm a lot less concerned about the idea that there might be some sort of plea agreement reached to get him out of office, because the outcome of that for the greater good will be enormous. If one of the things that it means is the president's not going to be prosecuted for election fraud for paying off Stormy Daniels, I'm willing to let that go. Because I'm much more concerned, frankly, about the fact that, for instance, the Carnes Detention Center yesterday was emptied out. Every woman who was in detention at Carnes has been farmed out to another detention facility in the country, including women who have been denied cancer treatment for months, and we have no idea where they went. The reason why they're doing this, by the way, is to make more room for family detention. So let's not forget that, like, you know, the concentration camps that are still being run by the federal government are enabled by the fact that the president is still in power. And the fact that Stephen Miller has been given such a long leash over so many things in this government. So we're all going to have to come to a place, you know, and I mean, I mean this very candidly because I think you all know this. Like, I am a firm believer in justice. I have an enormous justice trigger. This is one of the reasons why I became a lawyer, right? And my biggest concern right now is getting the president out of power. Because we have someone who is mentally unstable, in decline, with fascist tendencies, a corrupt attorney general and secretary of state, an acting DNI, and senior advisors and unnamed White House staff who are engaged in his crimes in line with him. And until he's gone, you know, I mean, again, this has like been my mantra since January 2017. Until he's gone, none of it stops. In fact, it gets much worse. And so at some point, there's going to have to be an effort to understand that to get him to resign, if that's the path that's going to take place, he's going to have to be given an appropriate exit. He's not like Nixon, by the way, where you can say for the good of the country, it's time to step aside, sir. And so, I will tell you that for those of you who are out there on your like revenge kicks, which I get, like, don't get me wrong, I really get it. But, my concern is that the longer he's in office, more people die. And at some point, relegating him to Trump Tower with full-time nursing care might be what's required, and allowing the state prosecutions to take their course in order to save the country and to save some people. So, again, this is again coming from the lawyer's perspective of somebody who, settled cases and, reached agreements where not everybody walked away from the table happy, and not everybody walked away feeling like they'd gotten their pound of flesh. And nonetheless, for the greater good, you reach an agreement. And I don't know what that's going to look like, but, I think we should all be prepared for the fact that there's going to probably have to be some kind of deal struck to some extent, not full immunity. Again, I want to remind you all, it can't happen, but some kind of deal to be struck on some grounds if resignation is what's on offer. As for who negotiates that, because that was a question we were asked this morning. Well, we don't really have any precedent for this save Nixon. So let me just say this. The way that it happened in Watergate was that some senior members of the Republican Party went to President Nixon, sat him down, and over the course of several days basically convinced him that there was no option for him but to resign. Meaning that if he didn't resign, he was going to be impeached in the House, and then he was going to be tried on the floor of the Senate. The evidence was so solid that he would be convicted, and that it was in the interest of the country that he step aside. I said yesterday, and I'm sticking with it, that I think the fact that McConnell has indicated that he will do nothing to block an impeachment trial on the floor of the Senate is at least an opening salvo in that effort. We do not know the conversations that are taking place on the back end. We do know right now that the evidence against the president is damning. And, the other thing that I'm just going to say about this is that the efforts to destroy the evidence through these like hearsay things and firsthand, secondhand witness knowledge stuff that's going on, that's not going to stand up in an impeachment trial. And everybody knows it. It's not like the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, when he's overseeing an impeachment trial in the Senate, is going to sit there and say, oh, this is hearsay, when the federal rules of evidence say it's not. No one's going to sit there and say the summary readout from the president doesn't say what it says, like Kevin McCarthy tried to say on Sunday. That's not going to happen. So the question now is how the dominoes might fall to leverage the president out of office. And, the other thing that I'm just going to say here, and everybody needs to keep this in mind, is that the only thing we're talking about on resignation is the liability of the president. We're not talking about not prosecuting Pence. We're not talking about not prosecuting Barr. We're not talking about not prosecuting Pompeo. No deal like that is going to be struck, by the way. Like, it's not like the GOP is going to be able to kind of like, leverage the end of prosecution for like 15 separate actors inside the Oval Office. The only case in which like the non-prosecution of other people has ever been included in anything is the Jeffrey Epstein case. And let me just say that would have fallen were it not for Epstein's suicide. You can't plead out to eliminate liability for other parties. That's not like legally allowed. So, from where we sit right now, I think we all have to be prepared that if we want the president to resign, there is going to have to be some kind of a deal struck. But y'all don't need to worry about whether or not Barr is going to be prosecuted, or Pompeo is going to be prosecuted, or, Jared's going to be prosecuted if he's in on the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. I mean, we got a long way to go down that path. So, I think everybody needs, again, this is like one of the reasons why I'm here after all this time, is to remind you all that like the law is the law. And while the president and his people and the attorney general and the secretary of state are evading the law at every beck and turn, it does not mean that once the president is gone, the law is dead. And the point right now has to be that, there is some kind of a negotiation to get the president out of office that is started and leveraged from the top of the GOP. So, I'm not holding out my hopes on this, but I will tell you, and I'll just remind you all of this, like, this is not a human being who wants public humiliation. And if he's given the right exit, he will take it. That's truly what I believe. So, again, we'll have to wait and see, but we are living in interesting times by far. Okay. I have one final thing I want to say today, because there's been a lot more of this popping up on the question feed in the last couple of days. I just need to issue a reminder to please mind the sources of what you are reading. I'm getting a lot of questions right now that are coming out of left field that are not from like regular editorially overseen mainstream media sources. Even things that you were seeing on collaborative reporting sites, you need to check who the reporter is and what their background is before you come asking a question about it. Because, somebody said yesterday, like, I'll just give you an example. There was a question yesterday that was like, what about this secret meeting in Italy between like Jared and Ivanka and Barr and, 15 other people and the Russians and blah, there's no evidence that any such meeting took place. There are a couple of people speculating about the fact that there was one Russian oligarch in Italy at the same time that Bill Barr was there. We know that he had a meeting with Kissinger because we saw pictures of it on his own feed. But Jared and Ivanka were out on the town in Washington, D.C. on, Friday night. As we all know from that crazy picture that has been pilloried quite a bit by Mark Hamill of their 3-year-old son, Theo, in a stormtrooper costume before they left the house. So, I know that these are very trying times, and I know we are all under a lot of stress. It is profoundly important that you do not circulate news sources that are not verified and real. Because the other thing that it does is it simply destroys the credibility of anybody on our side of the fence. And if you are engaged in conversations with people who are starting to break on Trump, and then you circulate something that is not real, you absolutely must verify what you are sharing so that you do not undermine the efforts to kind of do the good work that we're all here to do. All right. That's it for today. I want to thank you all for being here. It's, this is a crazy week, and I'm just going to say it again. You all should be taking really good care of yourselves. I'm trying to do that myself right here. All right. I will talk to all of you tomorrow. Stay tuned. It's not like this is going to slow down anytime. All right. Bye.